There are only 15 places in the world that you can legally die. 15 places where you make the choice to end your own life. Across the globe, this process is called euthanasia, or more commonly known as assisted suicide. It is an issue that is sparking new protests and puts the heat on politicians. People want the right to their own life, and that means they want choice whether to end it or not. I once had an uncle who developed a tumor in his brain, a tumor that would threaten his life. The doctors told him that the last few months of his life would be painful, and that chemo treatment would only extend the suffering. That is when he knew he wanted to end his life. He wanted to ease the suffering, not only for him, but for his friends and family. Unfortunately, assisted suicide was illegal in Canada, and any hope of new laws being passed would be in years' time. His tumor grew and pressed on his brain, and he died earlier than expected. And that's why I want to speak to you now, to inform you on what assisted suicide is and what the future of the legality of euthanasia looks like. The process of euthanasia involves a lethal dose of drugs injected by a doctor into the patient, thus ending their life. Assisted suicide has been around since the Renaissance era. The first writings of assisted suicide can be found in Francis Bacon's philosophy, in which he defined it as a very gentle and quiet death, which happens without painful convulsions. This definition became a staple in the work of medical historian Karl Friedrich Heinrich, who stated that a doctor had a moral duty to ease the suffering of death through encouragement, support, mitigation, and using medication. These two statements were highly oppressed by the Judeo-Christian Church, who argued that the practice of euthanasia contradicted our natural human instincts of survival. Many others spoke out against euthanasia while it was still a medical procedure. The medical-aided death of humans continued up until the 1940s, where the Nazi regime used euthanasia as a disguise for genocide. After World War II, a new piece of legislation was added into American law, and euthanasia of all forms were outlawed. It continued to be illegal up until the 1980s, when Switzerland passed a law that abolished the previous holds on euthanasia and made it legal to perform PAS, which stands for Physician-Assisted Suicide. This made the difference for assisted suicide laws. This law stated that the patient's consent was a necessity, and the law changed the definition of assisted suicide, making a more detailed description of what it was. No longer was euthanasia the proper terminology for the practice because of the lack of consent from the patient. Many opposed the law as it was still believed to be wrong and inhumane. After this law, various legal challenges began to form. The term euthanasia was used incorrectly to accuse the practice of PAS as a wrongful act, and activists pressured politicians to begin to hammer down on assisted suicide. This was also when organizations oriented around providing PAS services began to form. The most popular organization, Digitas, is still around today. These organizations were legally created because under the Oregon Death with Dignity Act, physically assisted suicide is not classified as euthanasia. Other European countries joined Switzerland, and by 1990, 5 places in the world, PAS was illegal. There were still many places in the world where PAS is illegal, mainly because of the strict homicide laws that each country has. These homicide laws do not recognize consent from the patient as a legal form of taking someone's life, and therefore the practice would be considered criminal. Many politicians state that the creation of these laws would create a dangerous society in which these lethal drugs would become more available to vulnerable people. Current statistics in European countries prove this to be wrong. In addition to this, the strong influence of religion on these laws oppose the creation of such laws. In Roman Catholic religion, it strictly states that taking someone's life goes against divine law, even if it relieves that person from suffering. These are the biggest challenges that organization and activists face. Dying with Dignity is one organization that fought for the legalization of PAS in Canada and used the catchphrase, "It's your life, it's your choice," as their frontrunner for change. Their success, along with 84% of the public's vote, led Canada to introduce new federal legislation in 2016 that gave the choice to Canadians and the right to end their life. So what is the future for PAS? Slowly, each state in the US are changing their laws to accompany assisted suicide into their legislation, and European countries that oppose these laws are enduring more and more protests in favor of PAS. The right to life is changing every day, and more history will be made in the field than ever before.